Three trucks stood outside Emma Carter's old barn. One was already loaded. A forklift carried another stack of brown food trays across the same dirt yard where neighbors had once held their noses and called the place a garbage dump. At the edge of the crowd stood Harold Briggs, manager of the largest grain mill in the county. He watched a buyer from Oregon press one of the trays between both hands. The tray did not bend. The buyer turned to Emma. "I want every case you can make." Harold stared at the stacks. Then he looked past them at the pale mountain of oat husks beside the barn. Those husks had come from his mill. He had given them away because nobody wanted them. He had laughed when Emma said she might find a use for them. Now a company had driven more than 1,600 miles to buy what she had built, but they had not come for the husks. They had come for something Harold could not see, and Emma had spent years building it in silence. Emma Carter's 68-acre farm sat outside Redfield, Iowa. In that part of the state, it was not much. Her father had grown corn and soybeans there, but after he became sick, they sold most of the heavy equipment. Emma inherited an old barn, a small tractor, 30 rented-out acres, and a house she could not afford to repair. At 32, Emma worked 3 mornings a week at a feed store and spent the rest of her time keeping the property alive. She repaired fences, grew vegetables, raised laying hens, and patched the barn roof whenever she could not afford a real repair. People in town did not call Emma lazy. They called her unrealistic. They believed the farm was already finished. Emma was simply the last person who had not accepted it. 5 miles away, Redfield Grain Mill processed oats for food and feed companies. It sold some of its light, bulky husks for low-value uses and paid truckers to remove the rest. One afternoon, Emma heard 2 mill workers talking at the feed store. "The Briggs Mill is looking for another place to dump husks," one man said. "They filled the old site already." Emma looked up from a stack of feed bags. "What do farmers do with them?" The man shrugged. "Spread some, compost some, mostly let them sit." "How much does the mill pay to move them?" "Enough to complain about it." That evening, Emma drove to the mill. She met Harold Briggs in the yard. Harold was 58 and had worked at the mill for more than 30 years. He knew every farmer in the county and carried the calm confidence of a man who was rarely questioned. Emma explained that she had open ground behind her barn. She wanted to try mixing the husks into compost. Harold looked at her old pickup. Then he looked at her boots. "Your father ever do that?" "No." "You know how much material we're talking about?" "I can start with 1 load." Harold smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile adults used when children offered to solve adult problems. 1 load turns into 10 pretty fast. "I'll keep track." Harold leaned against the hood of his truck. "You're offering to take something we normally pay to move?" "Yes." "For free?" "Yes." He laughed. "Miss Carter, you may be the first person who ever walked into this mill asking for our waste." A mechanic nearby heard him. "What's she want?" Harold raised his voice. "She wants us to dump oat husks behind her barn." The mechanic looked at Emma. "For what?" "Compost," she said. He shook his head. "That'll be the cleanest garbage dump in Iowa." The men laughed. Emma did not. She only asked when the first truck could arrive. The first load came 2 days later. It looked larger than she expected. When the truck lifted its bed, pale husks poured onto the ground like dry snow. Dust rose above the barn roof. Emma covered her face with her sleeve. The driver stepped down. "You sure about this?" She looked at the pile. "Yes." A week later, another truck came. Then another. Emma began mixing small amounts with chicken manure, grass clippings, and garden waste. Some batches worked. Others stayed dry for weeks. The wind carried husks across the yard. They collected against the fence. They blew into the ditch. Her neighbor, Carl Denson, stopped his truck beside the road. He looked over the fence. "What are you building?" "Emma?" "Compost." Carl stared at the pile. Looks like you're growing a second barn. A few days later, he drove by again with his grandson. The boy pointed at the pile. Grandpa, what's that? Carl laughed. That's Mount Oatmeal. The name spread faster than Emma expected. At the feed store, customers began using it. How's Mount Oatmeal? You charging admission yet? Maybe you can open a ski slope in winter. Carter Farm ought to start selling dust. Emma smiled when she had to. Most of the jokes were harmless. Then some became sharper. One customer said her father would never have allowed the farm to look that way. Another said she was turning good land into a dump because she did not know how to farm it. The comments followed her from the feed store to Miller's Cafe. One Saturday morning, Emma stopped there to buy coffee before work. Harold sat with several mill employees and two large farmers. He saw her near the counter. How's the mountain? Emma kept standing. It's useful. For what? I'm still testing. Harold stirred his coffee. Your father was a practical man. The table became quiet. Emma looked at him. Harold continued. He fixed equipment. He grew crops. He kept that place respectable. He glanced at the men around him. Now trucks unload waste behind his barn. One farmer looked down at his plate. Harold leaned back. Your father spent 40 years keeping that farm from becoming a dump. You turned it into one in a season. The words landed harder than the jokes. Emma held the coffee cup with both hands. My father also told me not to throw something away before I understood it. Harold smiled. Then I suppose you'll understand every husk in the county. The men laughed. Emma left without answering. Outside, Emma sat in her truck, still hearing laughter through the cafe window. Mount Oatmeal had been a joke. Harold using her father's memory against her was not. His name was still painted above the barn doors of the land he had spent 40 years paying for. She started the truck. Then she drove home and returned to work. For 4 months, Emma measured husks into compost piles, changed the water and manure, and turned everything with the old tractor. One pile broke down. The next stayed dry. Another grew mold. When she spread a batch in her vegetable field, the wind carried half of it away. By the end of summer, the husk mountain was still growing. The compost was not earning money. Worse, the barn roof began leaking. Emma needed nearly $12,000 to replace it. She had less than $4,000 in savings. Carl stopped by one evening. He stood beside the pile with his hands in his pockets. You could tell Briggs to stop sending it. I could. You could also make him haul the rest away. I agreed to take it. You agreed to try compost. You didn't agree to drown in it. Emma watched loose husks move across the dirt. I haven't figured it out yet. Carl looked at her. That's different from knowing there's something to figure out. She did not answer. A few weeks later, County Inspector Ray Coleman arrived. He had received complaints about dust and loose material blowing toward the road. Ray checked the pile and drainage ditch. How much more are you expecting? I don't know. I'm working on a use for it. Ray pushed a boot into the pile. This is more storage than compost. Emma knew he was right. Ray handed her a written notice. She had 90 days to control the loose material, reduce the pile, or show a clear processing plan. If the county decides this is unmanaged waste, he said, you could be ordered to remove it. How much would that cost? Ray looked at the size of the pile. More than you want to hear. After he left, Emma felt afraid of the husks for the first time. They had been free. Removing them would not be. That night, Emma searched her father's desk for farm maps and found a worn notebook from the 1990s. Most pages held seed prices, rainfall totals, and repair measurements. On one page, he had written, waste is often a material waiting for the right pressure, shape, or market. Below it was a sketch of a hand press he had once used to make fire starters from sawdust and wax. Emma read the sentence several times. She looked toward the window. The husk pile was visible in the moonlight. Pressure, shape, market. The next morning, She mixed husks with water and cornstarch in a metal pan, pressed another pan on top, and weighted it with bricks. The first piece cracked. The next stayed together but remained soft. Soon, rough brown plates and blocks covered the barn floor. Most broke, but one thin piece dried hard. Emma pressed her thumb against it. It held. She placed an apple on top. It held that too. The piece was not a product, but it was proof that the husks could become something other than compost. Emma read everything she could find about molded plant packaging. The language was complicated, but the idea was not. Clean the fiber, grind it, mix it into wet pulp, press it, and dry it. She did not need to invent the process. She needed to learn whether oat husks could survive it. A $300 garden shredder burned out in 11 days. An auctioned feed grinder shook bolts loose until Emma rebuilt its opening with scrap metal. She shaped molds from bowls and wire screen and used a bottle jack for pressure. The first trays were too thick. Others warped, turned sour, collapsed when wet, or cracked in a stack. Emma recorded every failure. Batch 14, too much starch. Batch 23, stronger edge. Batch 31, poor water resistance. Batch 36, held 2 pounds for 6 hours. Her notebooks grew thicker as her savings grew smaller. By spring, Emma had made a tray strong enough to carry eggs, fruit, and dry baked goods. It was plain. It was brown. It had small pieces of husk visible in the surface, but it held its shape. The Redfield Small Business Fair was scheduled for May. Emma rented half a table. She made 40 trays. She printed a simple sign, Carter Field Fiber, packaging, made from local farm byproducts. At the fair, Emma's half table looked small beside polished booths with glossy signs and free samples. For the first hour, almost nobody stopped. Then Harold arrived with 2 mill supervisors. He saw Emma's sign. What's this? Packaging. Harold picked up a tray. You made this from our husks? Yes. He turned it over. It looks like a feed pan. It's for dry foods and produce. One supervisor pressed the edge. Can you wash it? It's disposable. So it's trash made from trash. The supervisor laughed. Harold placed the tray down. I'll give you credit. Emma, you found a way to make Mount Oatmeal smaller. Several people nearby turned toward the table. A man from the local grocery store approached. He listened as Emma explained the trays. He picked one up. How much? For a small order. 38 cents each. The man raised his eyebrows. I can buy foam trays for less than half that. These break down naturally. My customers don't ask where the tray goes after dinner. He returned it to the table. Harold smiled. That's the problem with ideas made in barns. The barn is usually the only place they make sense. Someone nearby laughed. Another man examined the rough surface. Looks like something chickens would sleep on. A mill supervisor tapped the sign. Owning a farm doesn't make you a manufacturer. Harold nodded toward the small stack. A manufacturer has customers. Emma felt heat rise into her face, but continued until a bakery owner agreed to try 20 trays. It was Emma's only order. She delivered them the next morning. 3 days later, the bakery owner called. 6 trays had bent near a damp wall. 2 had cracked under heavy bread, and he wanted his money back. Emma returned every dollar. Then she drove to the bakery and collected the damaged trays herself. As she carried the boxes outside, Harold happened to be walking from the bank across the street. He watched her load the boxes. Returns already? Emma closed the tailgate. They failed. Harold nodded slowly. That's the first sensible thing you've said about them. 2 mill workers stood with him. Harold pointed at the boxes. You should bring those back to the mill. Maybe we can throw them away twice. The men laughed. Emma looked at Harold. Emma wanted to remind Harold that his mill had saved money every time a truck unloaded at her farm, but that would not make the trays stronger. So she said only one thing. I'll fix them. Harold's smile faded slightly. You can't fix every bad idea. No. Emma got into the truck. But I can fix a weak tray. That evening, Emma cut apart the damaged trays. Their centers were strong, but the edges were weak, and the rough surface admitted moisture. The product had failed for clear reasons. That meant it could be improved for clear reasons. Still, the failure cost her nearly everything. She owed money on the grinder. The barn roof leaked harder after every storm. Her feed store hours were reduced. For 2 months, she stopped making new trays. She cleaned houses. She repaired fences for neighbors. She sold the old pickup her father had left her. It brought $6,000. Carl found out when he saw her driving a small used sedan. You sold your father's truck? Yes. For the packaging? For the roof and the next machine. Carl looked toward the barn. You're paying a lot to prove Briggs wrong. Emma shook her head. If this is only about proving him wrong, I should quit. Then what is it about? She looked at the husk pile. It's about proving the material works. Emma used part of the truck money on the roof and the rest on a used shop press and a drying cabinet from a closing school workshop. From then on, she stopped guessing. She screened and dried the husks, weighed every batch, strengthened the edges with recycled paper fiber, and changed the mold so the sides supported each other. Her rules were simple. Damp husks did not enter the grinder. Old mixture was discarded. One cracked tray meant checking the entire batch. She tested the products with wet fruit, canned food, heat, and cold. The barn began to look like a small production room. Raw husks stayed apart from ground fiber. Finished pieces sat on numbered shelves. Every box carried a batch number. So when something failed, Emma knew exactly how it had been made. Her father's notebook remained open above the workbench. Pressure. Shape. Market. The county's 90-day deadline was approaching. Inspector Ray Coleman returned. This time, the pile was covered. Straw barriers stopped loose material, and only a smaller working pile remained beside the barn. Emma showed Ray the equipment. Trays. And batch records. You're actually processing it, he said. Yes. How much? Not enough yet. Ray placed a tray on the floor and stepped on its edge. It bent slightly but did not break. He looked at Emma. I can give you more time, but you need to reduce the stored material. How much time? 6 months. Emma nodded. Ray pointed toward the pile. If this works, that is raw material. If it doesn't, it is still waste. I understand. The 6 months gave Emma a deadline and a reason to stop hiding. She offered local businesses simple products that did not need to look perfect: seed pots, shipping blocks, and produced trays. A greenhouse tried 200 pots. Some softened under heavy watering, and Emma replaced them. A machine shop had better results with her corner blocks and ordered 500 more. The check was only $400, but Emma framed a copy beside her father's notebook. Somebody had paid for the product twice. The business was no longer only an idea. Month by month, the numbers improved. In the first year, more than 1 tray in 5 failed inspection. By the middle of the second year, fewer than 1 in 20 failed. Drying time fell from 14 hours to 9. Production rose from 40 pieces a day to 200. The pile behind the barn began shrinking. Harold noticed. One afternoon, he drove onto the farm without calling end. He walked into the barn. Emma turned off the grinder. Can I help you? Harold studied the shelves of trays, pots, and packing blocks. You've been busy. Yes. How much of our husk pile have you used? It isn't your pile anymore. Harold smiled. Fair enough. He picked up a shipping block. One of my supervisors says Mason Machine is using these. They are. What do they pay? Emma looked at him. That's between me and the customer? Harold placed the block down. You know, the mill may want to start charging for the husks. Emma said nothing. Harold continued. They have value now. They had value when you gave them to me. They had disposal cost, and I took that cost away. Harold studied her face. You always were stubborn. Emma wiped dust from her hands. My father called it finishing the job. Harold glanced at the notebook above the bench. Then he looked away. I'm just telling you, if this becomes a business, arrangement change. Emma nodded. Then put any change in writing? Harold had come to remind her who controlled the supply. Instead, Emma reminded him that he had no claim on material the mill had already discarded. He left without making an offer. Emma's first meaningful customer came through Mason Machine. Daniel Ruiz, owner of an Iowa food company called Prairie Table, saw her fiber blocks protecting metal parts and drove to Carter Farm 2 days later. The barn did not impress him. The order inside it did. Emma showed him the material. She explained it without long technical words. The husks are cleaned, ground, mixed with plant fiber, pressed into shape, and dried. Daniel picked up a produce tray. Can it hold 6 apples? Yes. Can it sit in a cooler? For a few days, not in standing water. Can you make 5,000? Emma paused. No. Daniel looked at her. How many? 2,000 in 6 weeks. That honest answer just saved both of us trouble. Daniel ordered 1,000 trays for a market test. Emma rejected 87 and returned the difference instead of filling the order with weak pieces. You could have sent the weak ones, he said. They were not what you ordered. At 3 farmers' markets, the trays held up and customers liked their rough, natural look. A month later, Daniel ordered 5,000. Emma borrowed a larger press from a community college. She hired Carl's daughter, Molly, for part-time help. They worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Halfway through the 5,000 tray order, the drying cabinet failed. 200 wet trays sat on racks as humid storm air moved in, and none of the repair shops had the part. Harold heard about the breakdown and repeated it at Miller's Cafe before Emma had even solved it. She finally got a real order. He said, and her barn equipment quit. That's what happens when people confuse a hobby with a factory. Harold said. The supervisor who had mocked Emma at the business fair laughed. I told you, owning a farm doesn't make you a manufacturer. Back at the barn, Emma and Molly removed the cabinet doors, pushed warm air through metal ducting, and rotated every tray by hand. Bedum. The trays were dry. Emma rejected the warped pieces and kept only those that passed. Daniel received his order 2 days late. Emma called before delivery. She told him exactly what had happened. Daniel was quiet. Then he asked, Did you test them? Every case. Bring them. Daniel inspected random cases before signing for the late delivery. You had a failure, he said. Yes? You told me before I had to ask. Yes. You lost product instead of hiding it. Yes. Daniel handed her another order. 10,000 trays. It was not the contract that changed Emma's life. It proved that her process could survive even when her equipment did not. By Emma's 3rd year, food companies were searching for alternatives to single-use plastic. In Oregon, North Trail Organics needed plant-based trays for a grocery launch after one supplier delayed an order and another raised its prices. The trays had to be food safe, strong in shipping, natural-looking, and available within 4 months. Large manufacturers either needed more time, demanded a much larger order, or offered designs that did not fit. Then Claire found Prairie Table's packaging at a trade event. She noticed the visible oat fibers. She called Daniel. Who makes these? A woman in Iowa. What company? Carter Field Fiber. Claire found a simple website with no professional video or factory photographs, only the barn, the husks, finished trays, and test results. Claire called while Emma was repairing a hose and explained the order. 200,000 trays, with more to follow if the grocery launch succeeded. Emma went silent. Claire asked, Is that too much? For my current setup? Yes. Could you expand? Yes. How fast? I need to see the tray design. Emma studied the measurements all night. The order could bring in more money than she had earned in years, or destroy her business if she failed. The next morning, she called Claire. I can make the first 40,000 in 10 weeks. We need 200,000. I know. Then we have a problem. I can show you how I would reach that number, but I won't promise it over the phone. Claire liked the answer. She asked for samples. Emma sent samples and kept 5 for comparison. They carried the required weight, stacked well, and survived cold storage. But 2 cracked during a drop test. Claire called again. We need stronger corners. I saw that in my own samples. You already tested them? Yes. Can you fix it? Yes. How long? 3 weeks. Emma reinforced the corners without making the entire tray thicker. The new samples passed. Claire then asked a question Emma had feared. Who has tested your process outside your company? Emma named the county inspector. Mason machine. Prairie table. And an independent lab that had screened the material for contaminants and measured how it broke down. Claire listened. That proves the product can work. Yes? It doesn't prove you can make 200,000 of them. No. We need to visit. Emma looked around at the patched roof. Second-hand press. Narrow tables. And dusty yard. When? Next month. North Trail booked rooms at the local motel. And within days, all of Redfield knew a large buyer was coming to Carter Farm. At Miller's Cafe, Harold dismissed the story. They'll visit, he said, then they'll see the barn. One farmer asked, what if they order? Harold smiled. An order and a business are different things. Another man said Emma might need more husks. Harold tapped the table. If she does, she'll need to talk to me. The mill still saved money by sending husks to Emma. But Harold now saw control of that supply as leverage. His proposed agreement required Emma to buy from the mill while leaving the mill free to sell to anyone else. Harold delivered it 3 days before the buyer arrived. Emma read it. You want me to pay for the material you still pay trucks to remove? It isn't waste anymore. Then why are you still paying to move it? That could change. Emma placed the paper on the workbench. I won't sign this. Harold looked toward the production shelves. You have a buyer coming. You need supply. I have enough clean material for several months. And after that, I'll make a fair agreement. This is a fair agreement. It makes me dependent on you while giving you no duty to supply me. Harold's expression hardened. Your father understood relationships. Emma looked directly at him. My father understood a handshake. This paper isn't one. Harold glanced at the notebook. Then he gave a short laugh. You've turned a pile of husks into a few local orders. Don't mistake attention for success. Emma folded the agreement. I don't. Those Oregon people will. He left. The next morning, Claire arrived with engineer Thomas Reed and operations manager Lisa Grant. They wore work shoes and plain jackets. Show us everything, Claire said. Emma began outside with the covered raw material, then led them through the screens. Grinder, press, molds, and drying area. Thomas asked what happened when husks arrived, wet or the fiber changed. Emma showed him the hold area, the first piece tests, and the records connecting every drum to every finished case. Lisa pulled random boxes from the shelves. The labels matched. Claire asked about food contact testing, sanitation, and product liability. Emma showed the independent lab report and admitted what she still lacked: a documented sanitation plan, expanded testing, and insurance large enough for a national retailer. I won't pretend the barn is ready for your full order today, she said, but every gap is written down, priced, and scheduled. Claire learned that Emma had only 3 part-time workers, 1 press, and 2 little drying space. You need at least 12 people and twice this equipment. Yes. Claire crossed her arms. Why should we choose you instead of a company that already has all that? Emma picked up the cracked tray from her first bakery order and the current North Trail sample, I refunded the first customer, then kept the failure. She said, "This new tray exists because I wrote down exactly why the old one failed." Thomas examined both trays. Emma continued, "A large company can buy faster equipment. I can buy faster equipment too. What you are buying from me is not the barn. It is the work that tells us what to do when the material changes. The weather changes. Or a machine stops." Claire looked at Thomas. He said nothing. Lisa asked, "Can we watch a full batch?" Yes. Emma had prepared raw material, not finished trays. The team watched a full batch move through the grinder, mixture, and press for 40 minutes. Everything worked. Then Emma saw a gap along the left side of the mold. As Molly reached for the next batch, Emma held up her hand. "Stop." The mold shifted. Emma told Thomas, "I can finish, but not like this." Emma opened the press and found one corner thinner than the rest. Claire asked, "Would it still work?" "Probably." "Probably?" Emma placed the tray in the rejection bin. "That isn't enough." One mounting bolt had loosened. Emma tightened it, checked the previous 12 trays, and rejected them all. Lisa looked at the time. "How long will this delay production?" "About 45 minutes. We have a flight." Emma nodded. "I understand." When the new trays came out evenly, Thomas compared one with a rejected piece. The difference was small enough that a customer might never have noticed. Thomas held them toward Claire. "She stopped for this." Claire looked at Emma. "You knew we were watching." "Yes." "You knew stopping could hurt your chances." "Yes." "Why stop?" "Because if I hide a weak tray during a test, I'll hide one during an order." The room became quiet. Claire picked up the accepted tray. "We're not here to buy perfect equipment." She looked at Lisa and Thomas. "We're here to buy a process we can trust." Still, North Trail did not sign immediately. They returned to Oregon. For 9 days, Emma heard nothing. On the 10th day, Claire called. North Trail wanted to place the order, but only after Emma installed a second press and larger drying system, hired more workers, completed its food contact and sanitation requirements, obtained product liability coverage, created a backup power plan, and proved she had enough raw material. The first 40,000 trays would be a controlled opening run. Only after those passed inspection would the rest of the 200,000 tray order be released. The company would pay part of the order in advance. Emma still needed to invest nearly $140,000. She did not have it. Emma took her records and North Trail's letter to the local bank. The officer offered financing only if she used the farm as security. Emma closed the folder. "No." The officer leaned forward. "Miss Carter, the farm is your largest asset. It is not available. Then the loan will be smaller." "How much smaller?" $70,000. That was not enough. Emma left. Carl suggested selling land. Molly suggested investors. Daniel offered an advance on future orders. Emma added the numbers and remained short. For 3 days. The opportunity seemed close enough to touch and impossible to reach. She had the product, the buyer, and the process, but not the money to grow. North Trail gave her 10 days to prove financing. On the 7th day, Emma attended a regional agricultural business meeting. She presented her records to a cooperative lender that supported businesses using farm byproducts. The lender's director asked one question: "How much of your own money is in this?" "Almost everything." "Did you mortgage the farm?" "No." "Why not?" "My father spent his life paying it off. The business can risk itself. The land doesn't have to." The director studied her. Then he approved a loan secured by the equipment, purchase order, and business assets. Emma still had to invest $25,000 herself. She sold a small wooded parcel at the far edge of the farm. It was a painful decision, but it did not endanger the house, barn, or main fields. The second press arrived. A drying room went into a metal shed, and North Trail approved the sanitation plan. Insurance. and final food contact test results. Emma hired 11 local workers, including a former mill employee and a single mother who had worked nights at a warehouse. Carl handled maintenance. Molly became production supervisor. Emma trained every worker with the same rule. We do not hide weak pieces. The first North Trail order began. The goal was 40,000 trays in the opening run. The first week went well. Heavy rain during the second slowed drying and put the team nearly 3,000 trays behind. Harold heard the news. At the cafe, he said, "A barn can make samples. Weather shows whether it can run a business." The comment reached Emma and her workers. She answered by running smaller loads, rotating trays more carefully, and renting a backup heater. Production recovered. Then, Harold's mill stopped sending husks. The scheduled truck did not arrive. Emma phoned Harold. "We have a delivery scheduled." The mill accepted a purchase agreement with another company. "For all future loads?" "For now." "You signed the delivery sheet?" That sheet was not a supply contract. Emma understood. The other company had offered the mill a small payment for material Emma had been taking for free. Harold had chosen the immediate money. He had also chosen the moment when Emma needed the husks most. "How much are they paying?" she asked. "That is business information. You could have given me notice. You refused the agreement I offered. The agreement gave me no supply protection." Harold's voice became colder. "You built a business around something you don't control." Emma looked through the office window. 12 workers were waiting. The presses could not run without raw material. Harold continued, "Owning a farm still doesn't make you a manufacturer." Emma's voice stayed calm. "No." She looked at the records stacked on her desk. "The records do." Harold did not answer. Emma continued, "I built the business around agricultural fiber. You built it around our husks?" "No." She looked at the raw material sheets. "I started with your husks." Emma ended the call. Emma had material for 6 days, and a major delivery due in 13. Harold was partly right. She had allowed one source to become too important. But years of records had taught her that she did not need one particular mill. She needed clean, dry plant fiber with the right structure. Emma called processors across Iowa and Minnesota. Most had little material. But a family mill, 80 miles away, had clean husks. It still paid to remove. Its owner, Samuel Price, listened as Emma explained her needs. "You're the woman making trays?" "Yes. I saw something about that. Can I inspect your material today?" Samuel agreed. Emma and Carl brought samples back to the barn. The first mix was too coarse, and the second tray cracked. Emma changed the grinding time. By morning, new trays had passed the weight, cold, and moisture tests. Emma ordered 3 truckloads. Samuel's mill signed a fair agreement, guaranteeing supply through active orders. Production restarted before the stored material ran out. Harold's decision had not destroyed Emma's business. It had forced her to remove the last weakness in it. She no longer depended on one mill. North Trail's trucks arrived on a bright morning. 40,000 finished trays stood on pallets inside the new shed. Every case had a batch number. Every pallet had passed inspection. Claire and Thomas returned for the shipment. Daniel, Inspector Ray Coleman, and several neighbors gathered near the road. Harold arrived after seeing the trucks pass the mill. He parked beside the fence. The first forklift carried a pallet across the yard. It passed the pile people had called Mount Oatmeal, the pile Harold had used to insult Emma and the county had once threatened to classify as unmanaged waste. Now it stood behind a clean production shed filled with workers. As Molly checked, pallets and Carl secured the loads. Thomas handed Claire a tray. She pressed it between both hands. It held. "I want every case you can make," Claire said. Claire signed the delivery papers. Then she handed Emma a second document. It was a 12-month agreement. If the first grocery launch performed as expected, North Trail would buy up to 600,000 trays. The total value could exceed $500,000. Harold stepped closer. He looked at the number on the agreement. You're ordering all that from here? Claire turned. Yes. Harold pointed toward the pile. For trays made out of oat husks. Claire looked at Emma's workers. Then, at the production records clipped to each pallet. No. Harold frowned. Claire continued. We are paying for a supply system. Tested batches. Honest records. And a company that stops production when something is wrong. Thomas held up the tray Emma had rejected during their first visit. He had brought it back. This one would probably have worked, he said, but she threw it out because probably was not good enough. People near the truck listened. Harold looked at Emma. He seemed ready to say something. Then Claire added, We found larger factories closer to Oregon. Harold asked, Then why drive all the way to Iowa? Because they could make trays. Claire pointed toward Emma. She built trust. Harold looked back at the old husk pile. Then he asked, Does that contract depend on material from my mill? Claire shook her head. We are not buying your husks. Mr. Briggs. She pointed toward the records attached to the pallets. We are buying her standards. The yard became quiet, not because people had nothing to say, but because they remembered what they had already said. The jokes about Mount Oatmeal, the claim that Emma was making trash from trash, the warning that owning a farm did not make her a manufacturer, and Harold's words about her father. The first truck pulled forward. Then, the second. Brown trays made from discarded oat husks left the farm in neat, labeled cases. Nobody laughed. After the loading was complete, Harold remained near the fence. Emma walked toward him. For a moment, they stood without speaking. Harold looked older than he had at the cafe. The company that took our husks cannot use all of them, he said. Emma waited. The mill can supply you again. Emma did not remind him of the missed truck or repeat his jokes in front of the crowd. Your mill can apply to become one of my approved suppliers, she said. Harold blinked. Apply? I'm building an approved supplier list. No single mill will control production again. Your husks must be clean and dry. Your price must reflect the disposal cost. I save you. And you cannot cancel during an active order. Harold looked toward the departing trucks. The waste he had once given away no longer gave him power over Emma. All right, he said. Emma extended her hand, and Harold shook it. Then he glanced at the name painted above the old barn doors. Your father would have understood this? Emma followed his eyes. He understood finishing the job. Harold nodded once. I was wrong about the pile. Emma could have asked him to say more. She did not. That's enough, she said. Carter Field Fiber passed $500,000 in annual sales during its 5th year. It remained a dependable regional company, buying husks from 4 mills, employing 18 people, and making trays, shipping blocks, seed pots, and food packaging. The old barn remained part of the operation. Emma repaired its roof and kept her father's notebook above the original workbench. Below the sentence about pressure, shape, and market, she added another line. Value does not appear when people finally notice it. Value appears when someone does the work to make it useful. When students and small farmers visited, Emma did not begin with the large contract. She showed them the cracked bakery tray, the weak corners, and the rejection records. One student asked why she kept the worst trays. Emma smiled. Because success tells you what worked once. She picked up the cracked tray. Failure tells you what must never happen again. Outside, the husk pile was smaller, covered, measured, and protected from rain. Nobody called it Mount Oatmeal anymore. The mills called it inventory. The workers called it fiber. Emma called it an opportunity that needed work. The husks had not changed on the day the buyer arrived. Emma had changed what they could do through years of cleaning, testing, shaping, and refusing to hide a failure. In the end, the strongest thing she built was not a tray, a press, or even a company worth $500,000. It was proof that something rejected by everyone else could earn respect, but only after someone stopped arguing about its value and started building it.